Welcome to the Streets and People podcast presented by Get Around Cabo Car Free. Get Around Cabo Car Free is a volunteer community movement advocating for more transport options for people who can't drive in Caboolture and Morayfield in Queensland. In today's podcast, we'll be covering one of these three broad topics. It might be Road Rules 360, where we discuss Queensland's road rules, the legislation, the design for people walking, biking, in wheelchairs or on a scooter. It might be Not Everyone Drives, where we chat with people whose transport options don't include a car in a car-dependent society. And it might be People and Projects, where our conversations are with people working on a specific aspect of inclusive transportation. So today we're doing one of our Not Everyone Drives episodes. We are on the Yagurabal Nation and the Gubbi Gubbi people are the traditional owners here. I have the good fortune to have Rachel here in our very special high-tech studio, also known as the office and the spare room. Rachel and I know each other because I bumped into you. I was cycling along on the Wamuran Rail Trail and I wanted to let you know about Get Around Cabo Car Free. Then I asked you if you would be on the podcast. So you're a local here. How long have you lived in Caboolture?
Since late 2020. So I think it was about October of 2020 I moved here.
And how well did you know the area when you moved here?
Not at all. I'd barely even been up here.
Where have you lived and where did you come from just before you were here?
Just before here, I came from Red Hill.
Okay, so that's in Brisbane, isn't it?
That's very close to Brisbane.
When you compare what walking is like in Red Hill and walking around here, is it different? Is it the same? Or what do you notice that is the same and different?
I notice in Red Hill there was a really nice network of bike paths that I could walk along, and that's something that I miss here. But here is also generally quite nice for walking. The Caboolture to Wamuran Rail Trail is very near to my house and I enjoy walking along that and sometimes cycling. Nearer to Morayfield you've got the Caboolture Lakes, which I also really enjoy walking around.
Yeah, so do you mean the Centenary Lakes?
Yes.
Is that where you mean?
That's...
Okay, because that is lovely and you can go for lovely cycles there. Do you walk because you like to walk? Do you walk because you don't drive? Do you walk because you're on your way somewhere? Is it recreational or transport? Tell me what makes you interested in walking.
I enjoy walking, so it's mainly recreational, but I also use it to get to places that I need to get to.
So do you walk up to, say, the train station or other places, or where do you tend to walk to?
Usually to the train station. I don't need to go there terribly often ever since work from home started. Also to local supermarkets. My husband can drive me, he has a car, but if it's a nice day sometimes we'll even walk together.
Nice. And, you know, if he doesn't want to drive, the supermarkets will deliver for as little as $2. And that means heaps cheaper than driving. So that's a possibility too. And how long does it take you to walk to the nearest supermarket you go to, or the supermarkets that you generally like to visit?
The supermarket I generally visit isn't the nearest one, because the nearest one can be a bit limited in what it stocks. Depending on the route I take, my preferred supermarket is maybe 20 minutes, half an hour, down to 15 minutes if I take the quick way. Yeah. Usually I take the long way though because I enjoy the walk.
So you would rather detour because the walk is more pleasant? Is that?
That's correct,
That's
yes.
what I understood. And what makes the walk more pleasant going the long way, as you said, and less pleasant in the short, direct way?
It's a longer walk the long way. It's because I enjoy walking and I want to walk for longer.
Okay, so it's not about the physical infrastructure. You don't feel like you're walking next to a busy road. The footpaths are the same quality. There's nothing like that. Or you're going through quiet spaces, better tree lines.
90% that. The footpaths are a bit better on the long way.
And so what is it that you notice on the footpaths that makes them a better footpath and the other footpaths not such good footpaths?
The fact that there is a footpath, that it goes all the way, that it doesn't mysteriously stop in the middle of the road like some do. It's also a smoother footpath, easier to walk on, and it's got a better grippy surface, so when it rains it doesn't get as slippery.
Yeah, so it's safer, it's more comfortable.
Yes.
And I want to say it's more convenient in the sense that it joins up better everywhere.
Yes.
And that's what makes a good footpath for you. And how wide is the footpath in the one that you like to walk on, the longer one, and how wide are the footpaths on the shorter one?
They're both wide enough. I would say that the one on the shorter one is actually slightly wider if I think about it.
And does that make it more comfortable, or do you find that there are a lot of other people using it, or does it make a difference in the way that you sort of feel into that space?
I prefer wider footpaths, but it's not such a concern that I will detour just because a path is a bit narrow.
And do you find the footpaths get a bit crowded, or, you know, because a lot of people are on their mobility scooters here, those 4-wheel mobility scooters. There's also a lot of people who are on the 2-wheel scooters, and there's also people riding bikes. So there's a whole lot of people who are squished into this one little path, whereas on the road, you know, you've just basically got, you know, a big machine going back and forth everywhere. And so does that number of different types of travellers on the footpath, does that make a difference to your journey, or how do you feel about other people using the footpath?
If it's crowded, it can make it a bit hard to navigate through the crowd. But I'm lucky enough that my work's very flexible, so as long as I get my hours done, I can do them at midnight if I want to. So I can plan when to walk. If I know it's going to be crowded, I'll just avoid that area.
Is it crowded quite often, or just quite rarely, or how often is it crowded?
It depends on the time. Around the school time, the short way in particular can get quite crowded because it passes by a school. The long way, it's not too bad. Sometimes there's a little more foot and bike traffic around school start and finish hours. You can always tell when people have been paid like their old age or disability pension, because there'll be a lot more people around the supermarkets then, and it'll get crowded.
Currently, people in wheelchairs and those 4-wheeler mobility scooters, they're counted as pedestrians under the legislation. I have this idea it would be great if they could use, say, a bicycle path or the road for their journeys. How would that change your sense of your space on the footpath? Would it make any difference?
Do you mean they would have a separate path for themselves rather than the footpath, so they'd be able to go on the road?
That's right. So either on the road or in a bike lane and off the footpath.
I think it would make the footpath less crowded.
That said, I met you on the Woodard Rail Trail, and this morning I went for my bike ride on the Woodard Rail Trail, and I see the usual ones, good morning, good morning, good morning. And that helps me feel connected to the community. It makes me feel like people are happy to chat with me, and, you know, it makes me feel like I belong here. How many of those kind of situations do you find yourself having?
I find that in general, people are quite friendly when I'm out and about walking. There's a few people that I see regularly. I don't know their names or anything, just to say hi to though. And I find that's a thing in general with exercise. People who are into fitness are friendly and always willing to have a chat, always interested in what you're doing, how you're doing.
Yeah, so it increases your sense of connection to the community. Is that right, would you say?
I would say so.
Anything else you would like to add about how you feel about the footpath quality, meeting people, socialising who uses it? Anything else you would like to add? What about the ramps? Do you find the ramps and the curbs, what's your sense of how you feel about those?
I personally haven't had any issues with them, but there are certainly some that I've seen that if someone was in a wheelchair, they would just be stopped and not be able to go further because either far too narrow, too steep, just non-existent.
Yeah, so we just interviewed about an app. It's a free app called Snap Send Solve. So it's across the whole of Australia and New Zealand, and all councils use it, including Moreton Bay. And what you can do is you can report the footpath and say you'd like it accessible if it's got a hard edge, as opposed to it not having a ramp. So you can say it's an accessibility issue. So that's something you can do as your sort of contribution to the community, for the people who are in wheelchairs who may not have a phone with them.
Ah, yes, thank you.
Yeah. So you have walked all your life. You don't have a license, is that right?
That's correct, yes.
And if you feel comfortable about disclosing anything about that, what is the reason for that you don't have a license and you don't have a car?
There's a couple of reasons. As a teenager, when I was old enough, I didn't have a job, so I couldn't afford lessons or a car, and I thought there was no point.
Yeah.
But also I've got some coordination problems that are not too severe, but enough so that I would be dangerous behind the wheel of a car. I've had a couple of driving lessons and just found it really hard to consolidate all the different motions and paying attention to your environment together at the same time.
Yeah, it takes quite a lot of complex skills. It takes a lot of motor skills, both fine motor skills and where you put your hands and fingers and everything, and then you do have to look around. And yeah, there is a big conversation at the moment. Should we be calling it road safety, the way the pedestrians engage with drivers, or should we be calling it road danger, because actually cars are very dangerous on the road? So
Yes.
that you can see, that definitely if you're talking about, you would be dangerous on the road. Actually, you mentioned you're quite musical,
That's right.
and so I wondered whether when you walk, how do you respond to the noises and sounds and the birds and the kids, like all the different noises? What's your experience of the soundscape when you're walking along?
Because my main walking route is along the rail trail, and as you'd know, there's a lot of waterways there, there's a lot of different bird sounds that I really enjoy listening to. And sometimes I hear frogs, like near the water. I keep trying to see the frogs, but I've never been able to catch sight of them.
And they stop croaking as you get closer to
They
them.
do.
Are you like somebody who just is a bit of an amateur ornithologist who just can hear a bird sound and go, oh, that's a magpie, or that's a...
The common birds, yes, like magpies, butcherbirds, plovers, crows, obviously,
Yeah.
kookaburras.
How does that change the way that you feel? So when you're walking along, say, Morayfield Road, this is my most detested road, and I'm often griping about Morayfield Road, and I feel it's with very good reason. Perhaps you agree.
Yes.
Yes, it's an awful road. It's very dusty. It's very quick. People are driving very quickly. The soundscape is, I'm not musical, and I find it quite distressing to have that sort of screeching and just the as it's driving past. And when you're on a quiet space, what's your sense of how you feel welcome in the environment, or your emotional?
I definitely feel welcome because everyone I've encountered on the rail trail is friendly and open, and because it's a quite quiet environment, emotionally I feel calm and peaceful and happy. I often get inspired when I walk along the rail trail because I compose music, so I'll get ideas as I walk, and I draw, so I'll get drawing ideas. I'll see something interesting and think, oh, I'll take a photo of that, put that in my drawing references folder.
Oh, fantastic. I had no idea. What sort of pieces do you compose?
I would call it modern classical music. I've got a lot of influences. I couldn't even begin to list them. The latest piece I'm working on is a concerto grosso, which is for a group of soloists set against an ensemble.
Okay. And so you take these ideas, you get inspired, so you're walking along, so walking helps with your creativity, is that?
It does. Walking and movement in general helps. I think it's something about the movement that sets the wheels of my brain turning.
Do you meet with other people to walk, or are you always solitary when your walks, and do you prefer to be walking on your own, or?
Usually I'm solitary. I'm quite a solitary person by nature. Sometimes my husband will come on a walk with me. Usually we'll drive to Redcliffe and do a walk along the beachfront there, which is nice.
Yeah.
Or sometimes he'll walk to a supermarket with me if we both need to do grocery shopping.
It's kind of crazy. You drive to a place in order to find a pleasant place to walk.
Yes.
That just strikes me as being, well, wouldn't it be nice just to be able to walk around the neighbourhood and feel safe doing so, and, that it's pleasant and comfortable?
It would, but on the other hand, Redcliffe has a beach.
Okay, yeah, it's true. Caboolture doesn't have a beach. It's very true about that. You walk here in Caboolture, and you do walk down to Morayfield, presumably down to Morayfield Shopping Centre and other places where...
Not usually all the way down to the shops. I have walked down to the shops before, but normally down to the Centenary Lakes and around that area.
Do you ever try and get the bus, or do you, just like me, given up on the bus service? If a bus service was available, would that change where you would walk?
I might use the bus service to go to the Morayfield shops, but it probably wouldn't change where I walk a great deal, because not only is walking fun and good exercise, it's cheaper than the bus.
Okay, yeah. So the bus tickets it's probably $6 or something to go. It's quite a short journey, I think, isn't it? $6 is quite a lot. Yeah, it's too much.
Yeah, no thanks.
Yeah. Is there anybody else in your family, like your other relatives or your friends, are they much into walking?
My mother is a huge walker. She has a car, but she barely uses it. She does use it for work because she has to drive from Redcliffe to Narangba for work. But she prefers walking, and I think she's probably going to be going for a walk when she's 90.
Do I have the sense that she's been a role model for you? You know, your mum's walked always her whole life, presumably, and has found that really beneficial. Did you accompany her as a child and then you created your own schedule, or was she a role model in some way?
I think she definitely influenced me. She used to walk me to preschool as a child and would walk to the shops nearby together and go shopping and to the library and places like that. In primary school, she walked me to school until I was old enough to walk by myself. For a while, I caught the bus, but by the time of high school, I told my parents, no, I'm not catching the bus, it's too loud and crowded. Their response was, okay, we're not driving you, you can walk. And I was like, yeah, that's fine, it's better than the bus.
It's a while ago, obviously, since you did that journey. How many kilometres do you think that was, or how long did it take you to walk?
I reckon it would have been about 2 kilometres. I can't remember how long it took. I wasn't a super fit high schooler, but it didn't take too long.
What was it like? What do you recall of your time walking with your mum as a preschooler? Some parents will rush their children. Come on, we've got to get there, we've got to get there. And some parents will let their children be more curious as they go, or a bit more lackadaisical. What was your sense of your mother's attitude about you walking?
That was a very long time ago, but I don't remember ever feeling rushed or as though we had to go, go, go. I think my mother understood that preschoolers are very little, they've got tiny legs, and they're also very curious, so I think she allowed time for me to just explore and notice things and take my time.
What is it that you started to notice about walking to school, or what did that give you in terms of your studies? Because you did quite well. You went to the end of high school and then you went to the conservatorium or
That's
somewhere
right, yes.
of music. Is there one in Brisbane, or was that in Sydney?
That was in Brisbane, the one in South Bank.
Okay. I come from Sydney, so I know there's a comment.
Yes, yeah, there is.
How do you feel that walking contributed to, clearly you have a natural affinity and ability with music. How do you feel that the soundscape and the walking that you did, the creativity, the patience, your mother's sense of allowing you to do this throughout your whole life, in primary school and then high school, walking along, and then the con, and now you're clearly a composer. How did that change your way of understanding sound by being part of the environment? Was that an influence at all?
I think it gave me a sense of the spatiality of sound. So if you're sitting at a computer composing, it's easy to think of sound as this flat thing that's only melody and harmony, not in an environment. But if you're outdoors, you can hear sounds coming from different directions, how they change as they get closer and farther away, and that's something that you can account for whether you're writing for an orchestra or whether you're writing digital music. So one of the things I do, I will record sounds from the environment and manipulate them into a musical soundscape. Yeah, a sense of space in music gives it an extra dimension and more depth, I find.
Yeah, that's right. That's very interesting. So I teach people to meditate and mindfulness. That's what I do. And there is a sound meditation. And what you do in sound meditation is that you become aware of the sounds around you. And as you say, are they near or far? But one of the other things that we do is, do you reach out to the sound or do you let it land on the ear?
I'm always actively listening for sounds. And that's partly because as a musician, that's what I do. If I let them land on me, I've got a really over-dramatic startle reflex, and which doesn't hurt, but it's kind of embarrassing for people to see me startled by a bird.
So I would imagine the sound of brakes, horns, those sorts of sounds would be quite unsettling if, because of the acuity and the sensitivity that you have to sounds.
Yes, definitely.
You've clearly met lots of musicians. How many other musicians have you met in your life that have been very oriented to walking? Is that part of their world as well? Have you noticed that as a bit of a theme?
Some of them. A couple of my musical friends are very attuned to nature and the outdoors, but it really varies.
Yeah, of course. I was just curious to think, I wonder if that's how much music is part of the walkability, because we talk about walkability as sort of functional, I guess, so much. We talk about it as being, are you getting fit? Is it your creativity or whatever, or thinking, or all those sorts of things. But I have never had this idea that it is about the musicality of the environment, from the birds and the different sounds. Anything else you would like to talk about? What it's like for you walking and sounds, your general sense of space in the environment, how you experience walking?
I think one thing I'd like to say is that I would love it if there were a lot more paths similar to the rail trail, because that is such a good footpath. It's wide, it's smooth, it goes for a long way. I always get annoyed when suddenly I can't walk anymore because there's a highway or something like that, or just a road that's unsafe to walk on. So if Caboolture was filled with footpaths like that, it would be perfect. And also if there were, like along some highways, they have the shared bike paths alongside them. If there were more things like that out of Caboolture, that would be amazing.
When you say share the bike lane, you can't ride a bike on the freeway.
No, but what I mean is these run alongside the freeway, so they're separated by a barrier, but they're designated for pedestrians and cyclists.
Okay, so you would like to be able to walk sort of longer distances in sort of smoother infrastructure.
Yes.
Yeah, and perhaps with a higher wall between the pedestrian and the car, so you're not so bombarded by the noise, I would imagine.
That would be good.
So, there are policymakers who listen to this podcast. What would you like to tell them about your needs as a pedestrian? What would you give you a magic wand? You've got your wish list, you've got magic fairy wings. What would you like to see more of, less of? A crazy idea, perhaps have you travelled much? You've seen things overseas or interstate? You've got all the money in the world, you can do whatever you like. What sort of things spring to mind?
For me personally, footpaths, because particularly when it rains, the ground gets slippery and it gets more uneven because of the grass growing, and that is not good for my balance issues. I can still get to places and pretty quickly, but I have to concentrate more and I'm mentally fatigued by the time I get there. And footpaths in materials that don't get super slippery when it rains. I noticed in New Zealand when I was there a few years ago, they are much better at high grip surfaces. And I think that's because New Zealand is just so much more wet than Australia.
Okay, so they're better prepared with better surfaces because they have it more as a problem.
I would think that would be the reason.
When you say the footpath, so a nice wide footpath, a smooth footpath,
yes,
like the one you're on rail trail, like basically we're talking about proper infrastructure underneath. Because if you look at the road, if you had footpath infrastructure that was as smooth and comfortable as road infrastructure, because when you walk on the road, it's smooth, it's easy, it's wide.
Yes.
It's great. So something like that, but on the footpath and all the footpaths everywhere. Did I understand that correctly?
That would be perfect, yes.
Yeah, I didn't know about this soundscape, you being a composer. Also, I'm wondering about trees and coverage, bird life, the soundscape. What would you like from the soundscape to be invited more into the walking environment?
Oh, definitely birds. I love the sound of birds. Frogs, if there's anywhere that frogs would be suitable for frogs to live. Native bees. I like seeing native bees. Sometimes at my house I get some of, the little blue coloured ones.
Yeah.
We get those ones sometimes.
Yeah. I think they're called blue-banded bees.
Yes.
So that's your wish list. When you look at other people using footpath and the challenges that they have, or perhaps if you've had any conversations, is there anything that you've noticed that they say is a bit of a recurring theme or ideas?
I haven't really talked about it with other people, but one thing I will say, if I was in a wheelchair, I could not have got to this house without driving from my place, unless I went on the road. There's just so many places with no footpath, or a footpath about as wide as my hand. That is not a footpath.
That is not a footpath. And you talked also, you went through Linfield Park.
That's right.
And you said there were some balance issues because there was no footpath in some of those spaces. Is that they areas which are designated as, they look like they're supposed to be walkways, but they just haven't been paved? Is that right? Or is it just a field?
It was more along the streets that there wasn't a footpath. In Linfield Park, there was a path, but there were a couple of very large puddles that I didn't want to walk through.
Of course. So what you're saying is actually the footpaths are poor quality because they have dips.
Yes.
Yes. And I know that if you walk down the Wamuran Rail Trail, there's a new development on the left. If you're going from Caboolture towards Wamuran, there's a new development there on the left-hand side, brand new one. And have you seen there's that footpath that goes down to that development, and it's brand new. I'm going, this was made in 2023. How long do you think that puddle would be? It's probably 5 meters or something.
Yes, I would say that that's about right.
And you couldn't walk in it unless you had gumboots or something. It's just, and there's no space on either side because it's all pooled. That's the developer who's just done a really bad footpath there. I just don't know how they get away with it myself, because it's the developers who build the footpaths. Because councils have to spend so much money building roads, there isn't really enough money to build footpaths as well. And they don't see it as a priority. They see roads as being a priority, even though it's less value for money.
And I've noticed it seems that the higher the socio-economic area it is, the worse the footpaths get. Like in Red Hill, the footpaths, apart from the bike paths, they were awful. And as you get closer into the city, there's just cracks, slopes where there shouldn't be slopes. And I think that's because so many people drive in those areas that it's such a higher priority, as you were saying, and walking infrastructure just gets pushed more and more to the side.
There is a professional in this space, and I've heard it, the same statistic in the US, that say about 4 in 10 people can't drive. It's
That's
like,
a lot.
Yeah, you look quite shocked. That does include small children, but it includes seniors, people with disabilities, people like yourself who have some balance or coordination issues, people on low incomes, people who are migrants, often it's migrant women, who in their own country, they don't need to drive, they come here and they find themselves completely isolated and lonely. Yeah, people who are on medications or who have health concerns. So there's actually a lot of people who don't drive. You are in a significant minority, only just a minority. I think here in Caboolture and Murrayfield, because we have high proportions of people on low incomes, it's going to be a little bit higher than the national average. Probably maybe 4.5 people out of 10. So I say about coming up to every second person. And I just think, wow, isn't that amazing that there's so little infrastructure for half the population?
Wow, yeah, I didn't know it was that high. I've noticed that as a pedestrian around here, I get a lot of courtesy shown to me by drivers, and that might be because so many people around here don't drive, so they know what it's like to be a pedestrian, so they have more empathy.
Only person who I have heard say that. It must be something, you must give off this radiant aura or energy, because I had the school students on a couple of weeks ago, and they just said the drivers go through at 60, 70 kilometres an hour in a 40 zone, and they have no intention to stop at the pedestrian crossing.
I have seen that type of thing. If they're walking to and from school, I think it would be worse, because school drivers are just, gotta get my kid home. Who cares about everyone else?
So there is a lot of research about the school run. It's actually a huge amount. So most journeys that people make are within 10 kilometres of home. So 7 in 10 journeys are within 10 kilometres of home. They could easily be done by e-bike and walking. All right. Wow. We have had such an amazing chat. We have pretty much come to time. So just before we wrap up, anything else you would like to add? Any final wishes, thoughts?
I think I've said everything that I really have to say about walking and what it's like and what I'd want.
I have so enjoyed this conversation. I had no idea you were a composer, and I think that added a lovely dimension to our conversation. Wow, I do love these podcasts. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Rachel, for coming on the show. It's been wonderful.
Thank you.
Thanks for enjoying Streets and People, presented by Get Around Cabo Car Free. We publish our podcast regularly at the usual places and on our website, where you can find out more about us. getaroundcabocarfree.com.au. That's www.getaround, get around, that's pretty straightforward. Cabo, C-A-B-O, that's short for Caboolture. Car Free, C-A-R-F-R-E-E. There's no hyphen in that. .com.au. Our theme music is The Thief on AM Sound, which is just like our cars on our streets, always stealing the space. So let's stop that thief.